In this video, I'm going to go through some of the alternative chemicals to BPA, which is bisphenol A. There are other bisphenol chemicals that exist inside of industrial society, and I'm going to go through some of them and whether they are better alternatives, whether we should get rid of all bisphenols completely, and my verdict on some of the things that these chemicals do to the body as well. They're all structurally quite similar to BPA, and so there are some similarities, but there are also quite some stark differences as well. Now, the first alternative to BPA that is used in modern society that I've got on my script is BPS, which stands for bisphenol S. This replaces the dimethylmethylene group on BPA, which connects the two phenyl rings to a sulfur group. Sulfur, it has 6 bonds in this molecule, and that is because it can expand its octet and therefore bond 6 times instead of twice like oxygen can, even though it's in the same group in the periodic table. BPS as a molecule is more stable to light and to heat than BPA actually is, which is good because, for instance, when you put a plastic food container in the microwave, the BPA may leach into the food, and BPS, it will have a harder time being able to do this, which is a good thing. However, granted, it's still going to leach, and maybe BPS is like 100 times more toxic than BPA, for instance. But is that sort of a good enough reason that means that it should be continue to be used inside of consumer society? Now, BPS has a couple uses. One of the main polymers that it's used inside of are polyether sulfones, and as well as this doesn't really have many particular uses, but BPS can just be used as a simple BPA-free alternative. You may have seen some plastic water bottles marked with BPA-free. Chances are this doesn't mean that it's suddenly ridden of all its plastic toxicity. It's just going to have been replaced with a bisphenol analog that's very, very structurally similar to BPA itself. But because it's not BPA, guess what? They can say that it's BPA-free. So plastic water bottles that are BPA-free probably contain BPS and some other bisphenol analogues as well, just to mix it up a little bit. Thermal receipts and banknotes, they often contain heinous amounts of BPA, and if they are BPA free, they'll contain heinous amounts of BPS. Something I forgot to mention in the BPA video originally was that BPA is quite often contained inside of thermal receipts, and when you touch these receipts, BPA can sort of dermally, through your skin, get into your cells and into your bloodstream and wreak havoc in the mechanisms that it does, be estrogenic, etc. in that way, which is actually quite a big issue. Receipts, after learning about this knowledge, I've known about this for quite a long time, probably for maybe around 9 to 10 months now. Every single time I've had to touch a receipt, it just gives me a weird, funny feeling having this knowledge. Obviously that is quite a placebo effect, that is psychological, but just knowing about the heinous amount of BPA that is contained inside of receipts, it's just a very weird thing, and it makes you never want to touch a receipt again. I don't really understand why receipts exist, to be honest. I guess it's some kind of proof of transaction and proof of consumer purchase, but some part of me just seems why do receipts really exist, and why is there a need for BPA to be dermally interacting with humans so much? And since consumer society has progressed, since BPA was probably used a lot more inside of receipts and banknotes, now they're probably all BPA free, but instead BPS will be used, which is, as I say, more stable to heat. Thermal sort of means heat energy, so these receipts are printed using heat. So if BPS is on that sort of original sort of receipt package of paper in a way, that means that when it's printed, it's not going to be sort of become free from the polymer that it was binded to before, and when you touch with your fingers, less is going to be able to get onto it. And that's great, because that means that there's less sort of random chemicals in your system. But the trouble is that really enough? When you consider BPS's chemical properties or biochemical properties, it's more reproductively toxic than BPA actually is. Studies found that BPS was more reproductively toxic to some animals than with the same concentration of BPA, which is very, very concerning. That means that it has an enhanced estrogenic effect. So, as I explained in the BPA video, when BPA or BPS gets into the body, it binds to estrogen receptors, which essentially activates the cellular signaling as if an estrogen hormone just bound to the receptor itself, which tells your brain that there's more estrogen than there actually naturally is. So it's going to screw your hormones up. It's Hence why it's known as an endocrine disruptor, because your endocrine system is your hormonal system. It's screwing up all the hormones. Your testosterone is going to be decreased. Your ratios between testosterone, estrogen, and things like progesterone, etc., are all going to be screwed up, and you're going to suffer symptoms of general low testosterone. You're going to become infertile if you have too high BPA exposure for an extended period of time. You're going to have decreased sperm quality even if you're not infertile. Your genitals are going to kind of be a little bit more funky. You could develop varicoceles as well, or you could just be more likely to suffer from like erectile dysfunction and stuff like that. You're going to be more fat because estrogen is like quite a fatty chemical, and you're just going to generally suffer symptoms of low testosterone, lack of drive, which is then going to cause obesogenic symptoms because you're more lazy. So it's kind of like a whole spiraling process from there that is caused by these estrogenic chemicals, BPA and BPS, for instance, being inside of your body. Not good news at all. And it's more reproductively toxic than BPA actually is. And as much as the fact that it will make you infertile, I'm actually going to tell a bit of a story that I kind of forgot to tell in the BPA video, but I sort of mentioned it at the end as a stat. A scientist did an experiment where there was a fish tank, right? And all the water was replaced with BPA contaminated water for just a week. Then these fishes, they would have like maybe done reproduction and stuff. The BPA would have got into their bloodstream and in their cells, of course. Then the water was cleaned out, so there was no more BPA, and it was good, healthy water again. When these fish that had been contaminated with BPA had kids, some of the kids were fine. Some of the kids, like they were able to reproduce and produce more children. But some of them had genital mutations. They were just straight up infertile and couldn't have kids. So the population was decreasing. Then when the kids that were healthy from the first round had kids, they were all infertile. Like, it was gone within like 3 generations. The entire population of fishes died out within 3 generations after it being contaminated with BPA for a week. For a week, the water was contaminated with BPA, and then like maybe it was years. I don't really know the lifespan of fishes, I'm afraid, but however long that is, it had a generational effect that lasted for that long. That shows you how long BPA lasts inside of our systems. And even if someone in 100 years into the future, when BPA or BPS, etc., has been banned, could still have it in their system and can still be infertile because of it, because it is such a generational chemical, which is very, very worrying. And that's why it's reproductively toxic. It can cause genital mutations to a child when it is in the womb. It will cause them to be infertile, potentially, while it's in the womb. It doesn't even have a chance. It doesn't even have a chance to, like, not make bad lifestyle decisions and be lazy, etc., etc. It's completely screwed from the start, and it's a very, very sad prospect. And for some reason, people really aren't learning from the mistakes of other chemicals that have showed this property, such as DDT, which was a pesticide that was banned all the way back in the 1960s. Yet people still haven't learned the mistake, and BPA, which has a very similar structure, is still wreaking havoc among society. It's just not. Another physical property of BPS is that it's more soluble in water, which does mean that it's less of a forever chemical than BPA. Trouble is, that also can mean that it can be more generational in another sense, not just through passing through the placental membrane. If children are breastfed, that milk is majority water. Milk in general is majority water, like 90% water. And then it has some other proteins and sugars and stuff that makes it what it is. It makes it milk. Now, the BPS can be passed through the breast milk into the child that way, instead of through the placental membrane in the bloodstream. That's how BPS can be passed through, because it can be something that, if a lot of the products used are BPA free, can have like quite consistent exposure to you. It's going to continuously get in your body and be passed down. It's still not totally water soluble, but it's able to be excreted to the kidneys at least a bit. Another reason that could potentially be bad is if BPA free water bottles use BPS, it has an easier time actually leaching into the water bottles than BPA would, which, even though it's more stable to light and to heat, because it's water soluble, that kind of counteracts any leaching that BPA could do, essentially. So there's going to be a lot of BPS potentially inside of old plastic water bottles. I hate drinking out of old plastic water bottles. I would probably rather go dehydrated than drink out of an old plastic water bottle. I can tolerate a new one because it's not going to have many chemicals inside of it, but like the ones that have been like scrunched up, I can never ever drink out of that. That would just give me just too weird. As well as all its estrogenic functions that are very similar to BPA, It's also strongly linked to insulin resistance, kidney function, and vascular health. 3 big pillars of you being alive. So that's another thing to look out for as well. Now, the final bisphenol analog, which I did some research and scripting on, was BPAF, which the F after the BPA essentially means fluorines. So the CH bonds that were sort of in the dimethylmethylene part of the BPA molecule are now replaced with fluorines. And CF bonds, like we learned with PFAs, are actually pretty strong. However, BPAF isn't even used commercially, which is weird, but a statistic said 85% of South Chinese children had detectable levels in their urine. So how on earth is that happening if they're not sort of having it in their like day-to-day life with the products that are in the houses and in schools and stuff? That is because BPAF is quite common in manufacturing the other analogues of bisphenols, using organic chemistry to make sure that BPAF, while not used inside of polymers, is used to make other polymers. That's its main use inside of industry and society. But this releases toxic fumes. When you do chemical reactions, you get a lot of byproducts, a lot of waste products. It's not great, and a lot of that isn't really managed very well. You know, when you see like the smoke billowing out of some of the factories and stuff, that's not necessarily just carbon dioxide and water. There's going to be a whole load of other random junk that's oxidized in that space, and some of that can be breathed in. It can get in through skin contact. Not often it's not ingested, obviously, because it's not really going to get into food as much, but that's how that is going to affect you. However, BPAF doesn't do the same thing as BPA. It actually has a slightly different mechanism. BPAF activates the ERR alpha receptor, but disables the ERR beta receptor. And that's probably due to the presence of fluorines, which are able to accept hydrogen bonds. Because there are no hydrogens connected to the fluorines themselves, it's not able to like have the hydrogens bond to something else, but hydrogens inside of the estrogen receptors that it will like sort of link to and causes estrogenic signaling. The fluorines, the hydrogens can like attack that or be attracted to that, and that's going to cause it to activate and signal, which isn't really good at all. But it has totally different mechanisms because it is quite a different structure to something such as estrogen, but it's still able to have some level of binding affinity, which is pretty bad. So overall, all the bisphenol analogues are BPA, the main one, the one that's been put under most media scrutiny, BPS, BPAF, BPF, BPB, BPC, and I'm pretty sure that's it. That's all the bisphenol analogues that exist inside of society, and there are probably more out there, random chemicals that could have been illegally synthesized and are used in polymers that are in products in our houses that we didn't even know about. But yeah, when I was doing this research, it was just such a saddening thing to see when I was looking through the studies and the research, and it said that BPS was more reproductively toxic than BPA. I kind of just sat there for a while, just like, how the hell are we letting this happen? Not that this is like our fault as consumers, but how the hell are we just as humans not able to learn from our mistakes? We now know that BPA is reproductively toxic. As much as there aren't any laws against it being like banned and stuff like that, the general consumer census is like more able to understand that BPA is bad for you, and it's bad for your developing children in your womb, and it's bad for you if you're an adolescent like me and stuff like that. But how do we not learn from our mistakes, and how do companies just think, oh yeah, just replace the middle bit of the molecule with something else and it will all be fine? Trouble is, that doesn't always work, because if you look at how BPA interacted with the estrogen receptors in the first place, a lot of the time it was the OH part on the phenyl ring that was the reason that it was able to bind to the receptor. That has nothing to do with any of the little middle bits. That probably only contributes to some dipole-dipole interactions or Van der Waals forces, some very, very small, insignificant intermolecular forces. But hydrogen bonding is strong, and they haven't changed any part of the molecule that's actually able to hydrogen bond to the original estrogen receptor with BPA before. So, like, of course it's still going to do stuff. Of course it's still going to be estrogenic. It's like, of course, the alternatives that are literally exactly the same, pretty much anyway, of course it's still going to do stuff. And people just, some reason, don't understand this. People that make the plastic bottles, the BPA free, don't understand this. It's just kind of frustrating, and I felt like I wanted to rant about this once I actually got through some of the research I was doing, it was just so heart crushing to see this. It's like, why are we not making chemical progress in society? Why is there such a lack of chemical understanding among people that run the world? How can this be like allowed? Of course, with BPA and BPS, like there's not a lot of that in society. It's not gonna be as much as what was in the water in the fish tank, for instance, but we know that it's still reproductively toxic. And who wants their testosterone decreased artificially just because there's a little bit of plastics in their environment? No one wants that, for God's sake. No one wants to have their endocrine system disrupted, even if it's like a tiny bit. No one wants to have that. That didn't exist. No BPA existed in 200 to 500 years ago, when we were living in little towns and villages and everyone was nice and happy. That stuff didn't exist, where we were all actually healthy. Obesity didn't exist 500 years ago, unless you were like a king that was actually really obese off of a genuine like 2,000 calorie surplus from stealing all the food off of the poor peasants. That's how people used to get fat, not through some random estrogenics, obesogenics, and all this stupid stuff that somehow exists in society that we've just let slip by. I don't like it, and I want to change it, but it's so hard because it's all intertwined in legislation. But with that, I recommend subscribing for more content like this, and have a good day.